I remember feeling so insecure, like, what's going to happen? All of our assets were up in question, and I didn't know where my next paycheck was going to come from. And this is where I got into mindset work. And I started working with my thoughts and the emotions that correspond to those thoughts. So anytime I would feel anxiety start to creep in, I kept redirecting my attention toward trusting and really believing in this concept that I call abundance. And so in that time period of really working on my mindset, I had so much radical transformation happen in my financial situation where
You mentioned about how you help women achieve financial freedom in a faster way. I'm really intrigued. How do you do that?
So one of the talks I gave at a conference last year was around my story and how I sped up my path to financial freedom. When I was separated, I would have never thought that in less than 4 years, I would have become financially independent. You get to a point with your finances where work is optional.
What does it take to be a financially empowered woman? And what can financially empowered women do together to change the world? A shocking statistic is that around 400,000 women in Australia are at risk of homelessness, and the cause of this is the lack of education about how to build a financial foundation, starting even before we first enter the workforce and well into our retirement years. My name's Dion Payne, and I'm the founder of the Financially Empowered Women podcast. I'm passionate about ending homelessness, and as part of that passion, I chose to look at the systemic barriers that are causing homelessness for women in the first place. The Financially Empowered Women podcast is designed to bring you the best experts from around the world to increase your financial know-how and give you practical and women-specific tips to overcome the challenges that you might be facing. Challenges such as how to negotiate a better salary, demystifying super, or how to navigate a separation and ensure the assets are distributed fairly. My role is to provide you with the best information out there to change your trajectory and become a financially empowered woman, because you deserve it, and the world needs you more than ever to own your worth and help others to do the same. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Financially Empowered Women podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Carrie Bradley. Now I'm going to let you know a little bit about Carrie. Carrie is an author, a national speaker, and an international mindset and strategy coach who focuses her work on empowering women with money. After starting her investing career at the age of 17, she took her financial education and grew her net worth to over $700,000 through the stock market, venture capitalism, and real estate. As a single mother of 2 boys, she now centers her work on fighting financial inequality by giving women actionable resources to better their money situation, and has helped hundreds of women negotiate their salaries, pay off debt, build savings, grow their wealth and legacies. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you so much, Dion, for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you here as well. And just, reading about the work that you do is really inspiring. So I'd really like to dive deeply into what you've been doing. So number one, starting your investing career at 17 years old, that's no mean feat. And particularly investing is a male-dominated industry. So tell me a little bit about your experience back then and how that's led you to where you are now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have my father to thank for being able to start my investing career so young. It's something I feel grateful for every day because he gave me the literacy that so many people just don't have access to, especially women. And so he got me into the stock market, and I just started dropping money in there. And then, I went through this time period in my 20s where I got married, started building a family, and also was supporting my husband's business at the time. And so in that time period, I've always been curious about finance and how to pursue financial freedom or early retirement if one so chooses. And so in that time period, I got really curious about real estate. And I have a friend who is very successful locally, and she became my mentor. So she started teaching me about real estate, and I got into that game about 2017 and got my first property and just started expanding it from there. And so then we come into 2020, which was a catalyzing year for nearly everybody. And that's when I went through a separation and divorce from my partner. And in that time period, I had just launched my business, and so it was very insecure time for me financially because he was the breadwinner, and I had left this role as a stay-at-home mom. And so that was the time where I went through a very radical transformation. And a part of my story in that transformation was around finance. I remember feeling so insecure, like, what's going to happen? All of our assets were up in question. And I didn't know where my next paycheck was going to come from. And this is where I got into mindset work. And I started working with my thoughts and the emotions that correspond to those thoughts. So anytime I would feel anxiety start to creep in, or I'd have these thoughts like, wow, what's going to happen? What am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? Or I'd start to overanalyze the numbers. I chose to stop fixating on those thoughts, and I kept redirecting my attention toward trusting and really believing in this concept that I call abundance. And so, in that time period of really working on my mindset, I had so much radical transformation happen in my financial situation where I hit my first six-figure year in less than 4 years after launching my business. I was able to pay off one of my properties, and then 4 months later, I paid off the house that I live in, and that allowed me to become financially independent on my 42nd birthday last year. And it was just like so much was happening, but it was because I did all this mindset work with my coach, and I was shifting my attention away from this fear and this scarcity into a more open place of trust and abundance. And that allowed me to take different actions that changed my outcomes. And so that's what I do now with especially women. I work on largely around mindset. We do some strategy, of course, but that's really where so much of the work and the change happens is in how you think and feel about money and healing your relationship with money. So that's where I'm at today, and I'm very much in a space of a lot of freedom and wanting to see other women get to experience the kind of freedom that I've been able to receive as a result of doing all of this inner work. So, yeah.
That's really beautiful. And I've got a couple of questions for you. The first question is, and without wanting to dig up old wounds or the past or anything, but in terms of the separation with your partner, obviously that was quite an sort of financially insecure time for you. Was the separation itself fairly straightforward, or was there some emotional baggage around that as well? And the reason that I ask is I know a lot of women who have separated from their partners and are just going through the mill, and it's actually quite hard because emotions are riding high on both sides. So I just wondered if you could speak from your experience to that.
Absolutely. And I'm very open about this because, yes, it was also very difficult. There were a lot of emotions coming into it. We got to this point in our relationship where I realized I don't think we're aligned anymore with where we want to head. And there was just a gap between what we both wanted. And there was a lot of differences in those perspectives that we needed to navigate. So it was very very emotionally challenging and vulnerable. Thankfully, I had a few friends who were very supportive to me in that time period. I did lose, though, almost all of my close friends, my family I became estranged from, and then my partner because they didn't really believe in divorce and that a woman would want to ask more out of life, which I know sounds kind of ridiculous now where I'm at, but that's where the place that I was in at the time. It's like, I was called selfish for wanting more out of my relationship and I wanted to pursue my dreams, right? And so I lost a lot. It was very difficult, but I had those few friends who were supportive. I had a friend who I stayed in her house for 9 months while I looked for housing for myself. And, it's interesting because in that time period, it was so vulnerable, but it also created this opportunity for every need that I had to be met in such a it was like pleasant surprises every day. I wake up and like, how am I going to do this? Or how am I going to work this out? And somebody would show up with a word of encouragement or with a meal or like every step that I took, everything just kept working out. And so that now has fostered this belief that I have that when you listen to your desires and what you want, and the deep ones that call to you, you can trust that you will be guided and cared for all along the way. And I know so many women, some of my clients who, yes, they are very much in that same position where it's kind of a highly volatile emotional time period. And it's hard to negotiate calmly when there's
Mm.
attachments and, baggage and differences to work through. So I think it's possible, but it is challenging. And so I do love supporting people in that when they're in that place of navigating those conflicts so that they're not walking away feeling like I'm wrong or I'm bad, which a lot of women tend to do. They take that on and
Mhm.
feel guilty about it. And
Yeah.
so I work with the mindset and the perspective to help them to see like nobody's wrong here. You're just making a different choice, right? So yeah, that does that answer your question about yeah.
Yes, it does. And particularly when there's children involved, I think that, and certainly what I've seen in friends and in my network, there is a lot of guilt, certainly from the mother's side, just around what am I doing to my kids, and am I going to be able to provide for them, and yeah, so there's a lot that's wrapped up in it, but I love what you have to say, around that, and I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, and then if you don't mind, speak to that a little bit, because I remember dealing with that myself. It's like, people say this thing like, well, what about the kids? Which automatically sparks guilt in somebody, and so I read this quote once. It said I think it's Carl Jung. He said, the greatest tragedy for a child is the unlived life of a parent. Meaning, if you are compromising yourself, you're not living your life fully, well, that's not fair to your children either. They experience some of that loss. And so the best thing that you can do for your kids is to pursue your own happiness, to pursue what it is that calls to you and lights you up, even if that means their parents are separated. Now, years later, I look at my kids and I can see how they have grown so much, how we've grown so much together. And yes, it catalyzed a lot of like pain to deal with, but working through that and getting to the other side really strengthens those bonds and they can see how happy their mom is. And I really believe that quote. So I try to remind people of that because yeah, there's so much of that message that comes at parents, especially like, well, what about, and yes, it's hard for children, so to not dismiss that, but sometimes the separation is the very best thing for them.
I'm very privileged and very blessed to have a committed relationship with my partner. In saying that, I've always felt that if either of us weren't happy, the kindest thing for either of us would be to separate and find where we are happy, and that in being happy ourselves would have a ripple effect on the children.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah, the ideal situation would be to have two committed persons like yourselves who are fulfilled, who are supportive mutually toward each other, and the children get to be in that, experiencing that, witnessing that. But if it's two people who are not lined up anymore and there's conflict and tension, well, in situations like that, if it can't be reconciled, then it's like, why not go pursue your own happiness individually and let them receive that benefit too? So, yeah, I think it can work in both situations.
Absolutely. And then the other question that I had, you talked about freedom. So what does freedom mean for you?
Ah, yes, freedom is one of my highest values. It is my highest value, actually. And to me, it means having a sense of agency over your life, having autonomy in your decisions, having choices. And I think oftentimes what I've learned is we can think that we don't have control over our lives when we actually do through our choices of thoughts and our perspective and the feelings that we cultivate within ourselves. We have so much control. That's what we do have control over, our actions and our behaviors. We can't control the rest of the world. We can't control what's happening politically or globally, but we can control ourselves. And so to me, I love helping people to recognize how much power they do have to cultivate these resources within themselves and to focus all of their energy on that, because that's what ultimately allows you to express your values with the world and then be able to see more of the choices around you. So I think, yeah, to me, it's more just having the ability to choose what you want to do. Um, and I think, yeah, once you realize that there is more choice available, it can be so liberating.
Absolutely. I read a book recently by Matt Haig, and it's called The Midnight Library. And it tells the story of a woman who just wants to check out of life, like things are not going well for her. She has a period of time between, um, she actually takes the action of committing suicide, but in this book, there's a period of time where she's not quite dead yet. And so she has an opportunity to review her life and review the choices that she's made. And it was a really good reminder for me that, yes, we do have choices. And at any point, like the choice that we make is going to lead to a different outcome. So it was just that reminder to me of, well, yeah, I mean, all of these possibilities exist, and all I can do in each moment is like, is this the right choice for me at this particular time? Is this going to get me closer to what I want and what my dreams and goals are? So it's really, I wanted to talk to that book because, yeah, it's just that reinforcing what you said about we've got choices.
The thing I want to highlight of what you just said is you said, is this the right choice for me? Right? Like that question, I think, is so important. To the point where I actually published a book last in December about this. It's about really listening to that desire or the choices that are right for you and not what society says you should be or your parents or your partner, but like you, what is right for you, and to really trust that even if it goes against some of what society says of you. For example, like if you are working in a corporate company as an example, and like you would rather be operating as an entrepreneur, but you're afraid, or you're afraid of the risk, or maybe you're afraid you're going to lose relationships or be judged. All these things come up. But when you listen to that part of yourself and you follow that, that's where you're living true to who you are. And so to, like you said, pay attention to what is right for me, then you can never go wrong. You will always be living in what I call authenticity to yourself. So, yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that.
Thank you. Now, in getting prepared for this interview, I asked you what was a question that you'd love me to ask you. And you mentioned about how you help women achieve financial freedom in a faster way. I'm really intrigued. How do you do that?
Yes, I'm happy to share. Well, and this kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier around the mindset aspect. So, one of the talks I gave at a conference last year, was around my story and how I sped up my path to financial freedom. When I was separated, I would have never thought that in less than 4 years, I would have become financially independent. And the way I define that is you get to a point with your finances where work is optional. If you want to retire or stop working, you can. You have enough resources to take care of you. And so I never would have thought I'd been able to do that on my own in 4 years. And so what I shared is that it's so much to do with what are you thinking and feeling? And we can even talk about this in a scientific way. I like to bring in like physics, for example, and talking about energy. So if you think about what's happening when you're stressed or you're feeling fear or anxiety about your finances, you get into a constricted place where your vision is narrowed. You're only focused on like what's not working or what's lacking. And energetically in your body, it's not moving the energy through you. It's spinning into your mind in anxiety, right? But when you shift over to thinking differently, to opening up, letting go of that fear and saying, you know what? I trust that I'm in the right place that I need to be right now. I trust that I have enough to do what I need to do to bring in this income. I trust that there's an abundance of all of these thoughts. What that does is it calms your nervous system. You start to regulate in your body, and that helps to broaden your perspective to where now you're able to see opportunities that you couldn't see before. You know, maybe you meet somebody who has a connection or something that you want to say yes to now because you're more open. And so that all of that starts to really compound the impact of your choices. And some people use the language like it collapses timelines or it reduces the time that it takes to get to the outcome, because now you're managing your energy in a much more efficient way versus just focusing on what's going wrong or what's lacking. You're now like open to saying yes to so many aspects of life in receiving what you could say the universe or what's put in front of you. You're now like living fully into it, and that starts to bring in more abundance, more wealth, more money. So so that I would say is the fastest way to do it. I talk a lot about putting pleasure into your portfolio. And what I mean by that is, you know, I think in the financial industry, there are these messages around I have to compete or I have to sacrifice or I have to hustle to make money. And sure, you can get things done that way. But when you start to bring pleasure into it, when you lead with what would feel good to me, now you're not going to restrict yourself. You're not going to feel guilty, right? You're following what feels good. And I call almost like a more feminine approach to money where it's more receptive and open. And it's a way that, you know, in my experience so far, you can realize faster results financially than doing it this more forceful, driven, competitive way that it's been done. So, so I know what I'm proposing is a little bit like some people are like, well, that sounds too good to be true. And I agree in some ways, but it also, I mean, seeing my clients' experiences, having experienced it myself, it's what changes your whole mind and body and your approach to money, to being able to sort of receive the abundance that is truly available to all of us that we often tend to forget or miss. So hopefully, did all of that make sense as I explain that? Because I know it's a little more out of the bounds of what we know.
Look, it's interesting because I was at a talk a little while ago, and the lady was sharing. It was actually Elizabeth Gilbert. She's doing a tour in Australia, and she was sharing that when we are in that sort of fear scarcity response, that we have the fight, flight, or freeze that's happening to us, and that she put it in terms of a physiological process. So you've got cortisol and you've got adrenaline, and And you can't make good decisions from that point because all you're thinking is, I've got to get away from this scary thing, or this scary thing is taking up all of this space and energy, as you said. So I know for myself that I make much better decisions when I've got the time and the space away from that sort of fear and scarcity mindset. So yes, I can absolutely relate to that. And then I just love the fact that we're bringing in all of these different things. It's not just talking about money; it's talking about our energy and our feelings and the joy and the pleasure that money can actually bring to us. And if we approach it in that way, rather than from this, I've heard people talk about it as the illusion of limited resources. If we look at all of life and just say, well, there's so much here. And if I don't have that particular resource, then I can reach out to somebody that does. And we all have the ability to do that. So I think what I'm finding from what you're saying is very powerful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that's what I'm finding, in my experience and watching other people who are working with money and relationships and life this way. It's much more steeped in gratitude and focusing on what is here versus what isn't, right? Fear focuses on what's not here, what's lacking, or what could happen. But when you get into that place of trusting and pleasure, it changes how you experience life to more of a thriving position, right? Fear is about survival, and getting into more pleasure and joy and openness. That's where you really start to elevate your whole experience of life. And you get into this position of just enjoying everything that you're doing, being more present to what's here. And it's interesting with money because, yeah, I talk a lot about how there's a relationship that you have with money. If you think about, we're relating to people and things and situations all the time. We are connected to everything, and that includes money. And so it's such a taboo topic, right? Everybody, there's shame around it. There's contention, there's power struggles. So it has a lot of negativity, and many people are carrying around these stories from their childhood of what was conveyed to them, like, oh, the money doesn't grow on trees, or we can't afford that, or rich people are greedy, all that kind of stuff. It gets into your mindset, your DNA, and then you carry that with you, which then can create this sort of contentious relationship with money. And so this is what I do too with clients, is like, how can we make money feel good, right? Have a relationship with it that's secure and not anxious, or avoidance. And so it's kind of fun to think of it that way and to sort of get playful with it and creative, because that's another byproduct of really trusting an abundant world, is that your creativity starts to expand because now you're not stressed. You're thinking bigger, you have more innovative insights, and that starts to compound your ideas, which bring more opportunities, which builds your wealth. Like, it really all kind of like feeds off of each other. So I just love talking about this because I really believe that, especially if more women have resources and can heal their relationship with money, our entire world is going to change in such a positive way. And the power dynamics are going to be balanced. So that's what really drives what I do, is thinking about the impact that this can have, not just on women, but on our world at large. And I think it starts with feeling good about money and changing all of that narrative.
That's a really powerful point, and a really important one to make, I think, because if we don't feel good about money, then nothing's going to change, really.
Yeah. Or you're going to push it away. Even subconsciously, I think, if we think it's bad or wrong, or something evil is going to happen if I have too much, like, you're probably not conscious of this, but it's in there. and you're automatically going to like resist it or not allow yourself to receive it when it shows up, because that's a your way that your mind is protecting yourself, you
Yeah.
know? So yeah, it does take this kind of inner work to really start to deconstruct some of those old thought patterns and introduce new thoughts that serve you and support you and heal your relationship with money so that you can open up to receive more. Um, so yeah, it's really so rewarding to watch women especially grow in their own power, and then, have finances be a part of that, but to just recognize like I have agency in this. So,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And when you work with women, what's your process?
yeah, so it's called my pleasure-based wealth process. And I tend to customize my process to each individual client based on where they're at in their money journey and what their specific goal is. But for most of them, we spend time focusing on, well, what is your current money story? Let's dive into your past. What do you currently think and feel and believe about money? And really unpacking what's there currently. And so then we start to reshape that and build in a new narrative about money. And this is where we get into the mindset piece. But then there are people who have, a lot of debt, and there's oftentimes shame that's tied up in debt. And so we work on healing the shame around that and coming up with a strategy to maybe snowball their debts. So I do love working with people on creative solutions to debt pay down, to new income streams that could work really well with your skill set or your lifestyle to bring in more income, or maybe there's an opportunity to negotiate a higher income. A lot of women especially are leaving money at the table because they're afraid to have those conversations, or they don't recognize their own value that they are bringing to the table. So we talk about those more practical opportunities, and working through any guilt. Like that's where the pleasure piece comes in, is learning not to restrict yourself, like believing you can build wealth and enjoy your money at the same time. You don't have to eat ramen for the rest of your life until you get to your number. Like that's aligned. Align your expenses and the things that you spend money on with what you truly value. So sometimes that can make a huge impact in someone's financial picture. Is let's get rid of that subscription that doesn't mean anything that I'm paying for. Like really assessing what are the things you're spending money on that are worth it to you, that feed you, that nourish you. So yeah, there's strategy in there. And then if they get to a point where they're ready to get into investing, then we talk about different strategies around, maybe it's real estate or venture capitalism or the stock market. We kind of play, that's where you get to really play. And I teach women how
Yeah.
to like leverage their money to make it work for you, or maybe introduce passive income streams. And that's where it gets more into like this game mentality. It's a little bit lighter and more fun once you deal with all of the heavy baggage from your past. So yeah, there are many aspects to it, but those are the main components of my process.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. I also know that you mentioned over the podcast that you have a new book, or you've yes, it's recently come out. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll hold up a copy here if you want to see my cover. It's called
Oh,
Dare to Desire, and it's a woman's journey from fear to freedom. And I just released this in December, and it's been a project for at least 2 to 3 years I've been working on. And it's largely around my journey, what it was like to live my life according to what everyone else said I should want. I built that whole life, the American dream, so to speak, and kind of waking up to the fact that this is what everybody else wants, but what do I want for my life? How do I want to grow? And when I started listening to those desires, that's when my life radically changed and it took off. And so it's based all on a lot of my story and some of my clients' journeys. But what it is it's a story of a woman named Kelly. And so you're following her journey of what it was like to confront her fears and, let go of certain relationships that were no longer serving her, learn to set boundaries, learn to take care of herself, all of these lessons that she's experiencing along the way. And with every chapter, there's a self-help section too that corresponds to what she's experiencing in her own life. So maybe there's a section on boundaries or, fantasy, even talking about what is it like to use your imagination or how to become more playful. So I kind of broke the rules by blending both sort of fiction and self-help into one. So far, there's been nothing but positive feedback. But that's what it is. It's a combination, and it really is. I wrote it as a tool of inspiration to help women to see what is possible for their lives when they flip the script and start asking, not what do I need to do for everybody else, which most women tend to default to caregiving and everyone else, but really to flip it onto them and to say, what do I want? And then having the courage to pursue creating that life that they do want and what's on the other side, the freedom that's waiting on the other side for them. So that's what it's about. And you can find it. It's on Amazon or on my website as well if people want to check it out.
Amazing. I will put a link to your book and also to your website in the show notes for anybody that wants to follow up and either buy the book or follow up with you and look to work with you. I have really enjoyed this conversation, Carrie, and I'm sure that a lot of people that will watch this or listen to this will enjoy it as well. Any last sort of words of wisdom that you want to share?
Yeah, I guess, I would just say to anyone listening, I would invite you to really take some time, if you've not asked that question in a long time or ever, to ask, like, what are my core desires? What do I truly want? And to really sit with that and let it like settle into your bones and to not let that just become something in the periphery, to not let the responsibilities and the demands of your life come in the way of you exploring that and being connected to that. Because I think so much of the answer to people's stress and anxiety in life lies within that question itself. So, and the freedom, I think, is a huge part of that process that you get to receive. So, yeah. So I would just say, listen deeply to yourself.
Thank you, Carrie. I really appreciate you coming onto the show, sharing your wisdom and the stories. And yeah, this has been a great episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a beautiful conversation, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share the space with you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.